The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume. In 2021, 2022, the FBI did over 3 million U.S. person queries of this giant 702 database, of this giant haystack of information. 3 million queries of United States persons. And make no mistake, query is a fancy name for search. 3 million Americans' data was searched in this database of information. And guess what? The FBI wasn't even following their own rules when they conducted those searches. That's why we need a warrant. 278,000 times. Not Jim Jordan talking about it, not Ranking Member Nadler talking about it. Washington Post reported last May that 278,000 times the FBI found, the Justice Department found, that they didn't even follow their own darn rules when they searched this giant haystack, this giant database of information on Americans. And so what we're saying is, let's do something that the Constitution has had in place for a couple hundred years that has served our nation well and protected American citizens' liberties. Let's make the executive branch go to a separate and equal branch of government, the judicial branch, and get a probable cause warrant to do the search. After all, it's done pretty well for this great country, greatest country ever for a long, long time. Why wouldn't we have that here? And oh, by the way, in a bipartisan fashion, coming out of our committee, 35-2 vote, we said we will even put exceptions in there. If it's an emergency situation, the FBI doesn't have to get a warrant. They can do the search. If it's an emergency situation, they can do it. We put exceptions in there. Here's the fundamental question. I raised this the other day. Here's the fundamental question. Of that over 3 million searches in a 2-year time span, how many of those aren't covered by the exceptions we have in our warrant amendment? What's the number? And guess what? We can't get an answer. They won't tell us, which should be concern in and of itself. But if it's a big number, we should be particularly frightened. If they don't fall in the exceptions and they're searching Americans, searching your name, your phone number, your email address in this giant database, that should scare us. And if it's a small number, then what's the big deal? You don't need thousands if it's a small number. But we can't get an answer to that question. So the underlying bill has got some changes and reforms that are positive, that are good. But short of having this warrant amendment added to the legislation, we shouldn't pass it. This amendment is critical, particularly when you think about the 278,000 times they abused the system, didn't follow their own rules. And now we say, oh, we got some new rules, I'll follow them now. No, no, no. The real check we have in our system is a separate and equal branch of government signing off on it. That's how we do things in America. And never forget, this is the FBI who's had some other abuses in different areas. This is why we think this warrant requirement is so darn important. And with that, I reserve the balance of our time. Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in strong support of meaningful reform to FISA Section 702 and in strong opposition to a mere fig leaf, or even worse, an expansion of 702. Unfortunately, we will not know which of these paths we are taking until the conclusion of this debate. What I know at this moment is that the base text before us right now is completely inadequate. Although it has some perfectly fine provisions, it does not represent real reform. Some of the proposed amendments that will be coming up today would take us in the wrong direction. And changing the sunset from 5 years to 2 years does absolutely nothing to improve the bill. Ultimately, this legislation should only move forward if it contains an amendment to mandate that the intelligence community obtain a probable cause warrant before they search the 702 database for Americans' private communications. Some of my colleagues appear confused about how 702 collection works and what we mean when supporters of a warrant requirement refer to backdoor searches for U.S. personal information. So let's be clear about what we're talking about. FISA Section 702 permits the intelligence community to sweep up the communication of foreign targets located overseas. When these communications are obtained, they go into what is known as the 702 database, where all the 702 data is housed. If the U.S. government wants to target a U.S. person for foreign surveillance, U.S. person meaning an American or a legal permanent resident, they already can. They do this by getting a warrant under Title I of FISA, a separate and distinct part of FISA from Section 702. The government cannot target Americans under 702 because 702 does not protect the constitutional rights of the targets of the surveillance. Foreigners not located on U.S. soil do not have constitutional rights, so this is not a problem. What is a problem, however, is that massive amounts of Americans' communications are still swept up in 702 searches. If a U.S. person communicates with a foreign target, that American's communications with the target end up in the 702 database, too. While we do not know precise numbers, we know that a vast amount of Americans' communications is swept up every year. The intelligence community is not supposed to search the 702 database for U.S. person identifiers like our names, phone numbers, and addresses without cause. Searching for Americans' private communications in the 702 database, communications the government otherwise would not have access to without a warrant, is the constitutional equivalent of conducting a warrantless search. But we know that the government breaks this law all the time. 278,000 times, in fact, at last count in 2021 alone. Officials are supposed to find it reasonably likely that a query will turn up evidence of a crime or foreign intelligence information. But that did not stop them from searching for protesters, politicians, and political donors, to name a few, without proper predicate. Because of these repeated violations, Chairman Jordan and I agree that the only way to preserve Americans' privacy and constitutional rights is to require the intelligence community to obtain a probable cause warrant when they want to search the communications of Americans housed in the 702 database. This is a basic tenet of the Fourth Amendment. Now, Chairman Turner stated incorrectly that the proposed warrant requirement gives constitutional rights to suspected terrorists abroad. Nonsense. The warrant requirement does not change any aspect of surveillance of valid targets under Section 702, nor should it. The problem is that when we surveil the Internet, we sweep up massive amounts of U.S. person information. And the warrant requirement we propose would apply the Fourth Amendment to that information, nothing more, and our Constitution demands nothing less. We have repeatedly heard some of our colleagues tell us that the sky is falling, that a probable cause requirement would end U.S. person searches of the 702 database. But there are no facts to back up these claims. We will be considering an amendment today to add a warrant requirement for U.S. person searches of the 702 database. This essential amendment makes exceptions for victim consent, cybersecurity cases, and exigency, that is, emergencies. Thus, the vast majority of these searches can continue without a warrant. But for the small percentage of searches of American communications that would be affected, the government should have probable cause to search their communications. It is simply unfair to ask the intelligence community to both zealously protect our security while also protecting the constitutional rights of those surveilled. American system of checks and balances exists precisely for cases such as this, where two considerations must coexist at odds with one another. For too long, FISA Section 702 has enabled the surveillance of Americans without adequate safeguards to protect our civil liberties. Americans need Congress to enact these guardrails. And with Section 702 expiring soon, we have a rare opportunity to protect Americans' privacy while giving enforcement the tools they need to keep us safe. I encourage my colleagues to vote no on this legislation unless a probable cause warrant is adopted. And I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to my friend and a member of the Judiciary Committee, the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't discount the mounting dangers we face from enemies abroad. But we also cannot discount the dangers we face at home from the very powers that this bill would continue. As has been pointed out, the FBI abused these powers 278,000 times in a single year and turned them against American citizens, fishing for January 6th and Black Lives Matter rioters, probing political donors, and even piercing congressional offices. John Adams believed that the indiscriminate searches by British officials became the first spark of the American Revolution. Having lived under such a tyranny, the founders protected us with the Fourth Amendment. Before authorities can search through our records, they have to get a warrant from an independent judge by showing probable cause to suspect that we've committed a crime. Now, there are many excellent reforms in this bill, and I applaud them. But they largely depend on these agencies policing themselves, and experience warns us that's just not enough. Without a warrant requirement, I fear these powers will once again be turned against our fundamental liberties. And these days, that scares me as much as a terrorist attack. Just imagine how much safer we'd all be if we stationed a soldier in every house. But we have a Third Amendment to protect us against that tyranny, just as we have a Fourth Amendment to protect us against the tyranny of indiscriminate searches. Benjamin Franklin's warning echoes through his age to ours today. Those who can give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. Let that not be history's judgment of us. I yield back.